Ray. What do you want to do tonight?
The same thing we do every night, Pinky. Try to take over the world.
All right, yo, let's get into it.
Try to take over the world.
Reaching freedom.
Try to take over the world.
And greatest chaplain in the world, Mr.
Try
Lance
to
O'Neill.
take over the world.
Well, good evening. I'm not even going to try to do KJ's opening tonight, but instead, we're going to start right off with a guest. Now, KJ is flying from Hawaii. I know, tough life, from Hawaii back to the mainland right now. And he texted me and said, "Hey, I'm not going to be able to make it, so you'll have to run the show by yourself." What he failed to tell me is that we have a guest tonight. So with us is Mr. David Auger. And I said it right that time?
Yeah, that's great.
Awesome. So I literally don't know who you are, David. And I know that sounds absolutely horrible as far as show prep and everything goes. But normally KJ does all the interviews for the guests. And then I come in and basically go off the cuff because then I'm part of the audience. So I don't know what's going on. And so I react kind of like an audience member. So tonight it's interesting because now not only am I the host, but I'm also the audience at the same time. Okay. So David, tell me who you are and what we're doing, and we'll go from there.
Okay, well, excellent. I guess the background that would probably bring the reason why I'm even on your show is I wrote a book, my first that has to do with the concept of sustainability.
Okay.
Sustainability through the lenses that an entomologist would place on the most loved and the most hated of insect communities. As a chaplain, you're familiar with John the Baptist, and he had both locusts and honey. Locusts would be the most hated of insect communities on the planet. Of course, it's the eighth plague with the Jews leaving Egypt, and also the honey would be the most loved of insects because of the sweetness, the pollination aspect of what they do. So what I did is I wrote a book talking about sustainability and what could be learned from those two communities and thus applied as humans. And so what I'm trying to bring to the table is a different perspective than the I don't want to call it silliness, but the aspect that there is some type of end in mind that we have, and that the concept of sustainability is more normative. If you talk about something beautiful or attractive, that should be more in the vein of what sustainability is. Something can become more or less sustainable or more or less beautiful based upon our being able to understand the concept and hopefully going forward with that. My book brings that to light, and that's the reason why you've got me on this this episode. Also, I was in the military, and I think that's the tie or the link that is one of the reasons why you're talking to me tonight.
Okay, so were you a POG then?
A POG. Help me a little bit with that.
A person other than a grunt. So if you were you Army? What branch were you?
Yeah, I was Army. I spent a lot of time with infantry and with artillery. So I guess I'm a grunt.
You're a grunt, so you're not a POG. You are a grunt itself. All right.
Yeah.
So I'm completely POG because I start off as the most hated branch in the Army, which is military police. Okay. And then I moved to the oxymoron of the Army, military intelligence. Okay. And then I went to the only branch that actually takes care of soldiers, I think, which is chaplains. Okay. So I was in field artillery for a unit though, so we probably could talk a little bit about that. But sustainability, that's a really interesting. How much, as far as the sustainability, how much crossover do you have with the climate? Those people who think that the world is coming to an end because of climate change. Is there any crossover there, or is it more sustainability in terms of just how to make your life better and the planet better?
Well, I am an environmental engineer. So for the past 35 years, I've worked in industry, having to deal with a myriad of rules. Some of those having to deal with greenhouse gases and the requirements that restrict like refrigerant usages, the the concern that you have for any CO2 equivalent aspect of fuel that's being burned to, to generate heat or the like. So I am familiar with that. The book does not bring that to light because I'm trying to get people to think of it more as a normative term. Once again, as a descriptor of how best to bring things together and learn from them. And that's perhaps where I can shed light on this story.
Okay.
Yeah. I mean, I'm a professional engineer, so I could bring to the table things just about that, about the different factors that are used for fuels that are burned and the like. But I don't think that's very helpful for your audience, nor perhaps very helpful for people in the long term.
Well, it doesn't sound like that's the point of the book either.
That's right.
Okay, so the point of the book is to come to sustainability in a normative way.
Yeah.
So what does that mean in somebody's life other than look for the good? Or maybe it is. Maybe it comes down to as simple as look for the good and avoid the bad.
Perhaps not that simple. As a chaplain, you're probably familiar with a guy named Viktor Frankl.
I am a huge Viktor Frankl fan. That is
Excellent.
the book that is the only self-help book that I think has any value in the world. I think all the others are kind of just blowing smoke to a large degree, but Man's Search for Meaning, I think, is my favorite non-scriptural book that I refer anybody to. And if you haven't read it, I think it's one of the most brilliant books ever written.
That's the reason for the title of Man's Search for Sustainability, because I took his very concepts to light to try and bring this story to people as well. I'm going to then be preaching to the choir, aren't I? To bring anything up about Viktor Frankl, but because you may be familiar with it and everybody else may not, could you give me a few minutes just to explain who he is? And
Absolutely.
Okay, great. Viktor Frankl was an Austrian neurologist and psychologist who founded what he called the field of logotherapy. It's been dubbed the third Viennese school of psychology. And that would be along with Freud and Adler. Logotherapy developed in and through what Frankl had as his personal experiences in these Nazi concentration camps. Now, if your audience is familiar with or not familiar with Frankl, but they may be familiar with Freud, who said that the sexual drive was the reason and justification for why we do things and why we don't do things. And Adler had to deal with power. Both of those have a large following within the world. Not as many follow the search for meaning that Frankl puts on the table. Now, Frankl spent 3 years in 4 different concentration camps in Theresienstadt, Auschwitz, Kaufering, and Turkenheim. And he lost his father in the Terezin ghetto, his brother and mother at Auschwitz, his wife at the Bergen-Belsen concentration camp, and his sister Stella, she escaped from Australia, or escaped to Australia. But the background is he had to work in the infirmary. And as a psychologist, I mean, he was just a doctor, they put him in there and he had a chance to measure the meaning of people's justification for sustaining their life one more day. And if you're, of course you are, and you do reference people to this book, he found that there was 3 basic reasons why people would step forward and sustain their existence for 24 more hours. And that is that they had someone on the outside of that concentration camp that they needed to see, someone they needed to touch, someone that they felt their life needed to continue, because who knows what the next day is going to take place, but that person was that important to them. Or that they had something that had to come out of them, a song, a book to write, an experience to be had. And then the third one, which is the kind of the foundation of his entire therapy, logotherapy, was the fact that there had to be a greater grasp of meaning about why we wanted to sustain anything that hadn't been answered or discovered yet. These people were going to live one more day because the story wasn't just about them. The story was bigger than them. And that's where I try and bring the concept of sustainability to light, because we have a desire to sustain something. Our country as people in the military, our families as fathers or husbands, our communities as members that live in this area. All of those things bring to light something that has to deal with meaning and also with our desire to sustain it. And that's where I kind of bring it to the table. What does a honeybee want to sustain? What does a locust want to sustain? And of course, they do very well in sustaining their own communities. What can we learn from them? Or what can we bring to the table as a study of those two areas?
Yeah, that's really an interesting starting point. Like I said, I love Frankel and that book, and so it makes me. If you don't know what he wrote about, one of the things that he was really fascinated was how low the suicide rate in these camps were. Mm-hmm. And so, yeah, sustaining for 24 more hours. So from your point of view, then, when we're looking at sustaining our lives and those things in our lives, what can we learn? Let's start with the negative one, or to us, what would be the negative one? Being from Salt Lake, there's a lot of stories also about the locusts that came and nearly wiped out the original settlers of Salt Lake, the LDS settlers, before the seagulls came in and ate them and saved the crops. So what is it about locusts that we can learn about sustainability?
Well, what I do is I show that both of the communities, these are insect communities that could be numbered in the millions or in some cases billions and trillions, continue their own existence. Many people put, like you mentioned, the locusts on the lower end of the spectrum. We don't want to be like them, but they have an ability to manage stress that is actually to their advantage. Now, it's not to our advantage, but within their own community, the stress actually makes a metamorphic change in their very person. Now, I talk about, or not person, their insect existence. I talk about desert locusts. These are the ones on northern Africa, and they move over into the Middle East and into India. The desert locust actually is what would be identified by most of us as just a grasshopper. It appears as a grasshopper. It's green. If you put it on a table, it would look very familiar to a grasshopper we'd see throughout all of North America. However, when it's in a stressful situation, first in an area where it's been given an abundance of resources, and then those resources begin to decrease, like in a desert environment where it was first very wet because of the monsoon season, there would be an increase in the population, then a decrease in the food supply, resulting in these grasshoppers, these desert locusts, and they appear that way, coming very close together. That stress results in a metamorphic change. Their bodies actually change in color. Their brain sizes increase by 30%. Their operational aspect of what they do, they don't fly at night. They begin to fly during the daytime. They become gregarious instead of solitary. And all of these metamorphic changes, all of these dynamics, all of a sudden result in what appears to be an army of marching locusts and then eventually flying locusts that can't be stopped except from a United Nations effort to do so. Now, what can we learn from that? We can learn that some situations like stress cannot always be termed bad. The desert locust can actually grow from that. Their congregation, they're maximizing the aspects of what's available to them in their very system, shows that this is to their benefit as an insect community. Now, to us as humans, we want to stop them, but their particular response to stress is to their strength and their propagation. So many times we'll say stress bad. We want order. We want simplicity. We want to keep that particular thing down. But as someone in the military, someone in a sporting event, stress is actually to our advantage. It brings out our very strength, our very ability to go beyond the minimum that's required.
I think most people avoid stress at all costs, not understanding that stress can be. I mean, you grow from stress. Anybody that does any type of physical therapy, physical training, physical therapy is probably a great example. When somebody's had I had shoulder surgery about 1.5 years ago. And when you start doing what's just comfortable, it actually ends up locking your shoulder in place because you're not getting that stress. So is that the type of thing that we need to realize in our own lives, that stress has benefits, but maybe where does the stress become too much
Well, you've got to understand that there's a spectrum here that you're trying to grasp. So I think that your listeners would have to see that, yeah, there's a benefit there, but there's also a detriment or a limit that we have. And that's the reason why it's on the table, because through this discussion, we can learn from the past instead of from the from the scientific solution to sustainable needs in the future. You're trying to say, let's look at this story. Let's look at a community that's doing it right, and maybe not poo-poo stress as something that isn't to our benefit.
So how would somebody, since our community starts really at the individual level and in our house, what can we learn from locusts that would help in our own homes?
All right. Well, let's look at making leaders or the leadership decisions. You can learn from a locust on also that aspect of it. Like you're familiar with the Bible, the discussion about the fact that there are locusts, and one of the identification of them being very wise. The point that their wisdom is to an extreme above other insects is the fact that they can move forward without a leader. That their individual advance, because you're not going to find like a queen of a hive. There isn't a king of a swarm of locusts. You can see an awareness of those that are around them, and then a movement forward in the proper direction. Now, what can that do with our own household? There's the initiative requirements that we're going to all try and find a way to inculcate into our children or into others that are around us. That initiative is to their benefit as well as the entire family. They don't have to wait for instructions. They can actually take that benefit of what a locust seems to have and go forward. And one of the reasons why Proverbs 30 talks about.
I think one of the things we see in society right now is almost the anti of that, which is the helicopter parent, which, they come in and I look at kids and say, all right, we have to have the left and the right limits. And as long as our kids are within those left and right limits, they're safe, but they're also experiencing life. And too many times parents make that left and right limit almost nothing, to the point that I'm going to watch and make sure nothing happens to my kid, but then they don't ever learn anything. So it sounds like the locusts are individuals. What's funny is, as you're saying that about locusts, it makes me think of the military in these terms. It used to be that when you're on the battlefield, the best thing you could do is take out the individual leaders. That was always the goal of every army, was to kill the officers. Because if you took out the officers, there would be nobody to tell the soldiers what to do. And then when people started fighting the United States, there became this understanding: you don't take the officers out because they're the ones that are holding the soldiers back from going crazy and overrunning everything. So maybe that's like the locusts. Once the NCOs and the soldiers are left to their own, they're like, let's go get it. And they go rushing in.
Okay.
So
that's the way to look at it.
So, okay. So I assume the book's not just honeybees and locusts, but let's go to the bees, since you brought up bees. So what can we learn on the bee side?
Well, one of the things that makes bees so attractive is the fact that there is order. There is a tremendous amount of output from their efforts. There are 26 different states that I've identified the honeybee as their state bee. Now, the honeybee is from Europe and actually from Africa. So in the United States, to have said this is our state insect is rather, an applause to how important this insect seems to be. I mean, you mentioned Utah. The Utah flag has a honeycomb right there, or a beehive prominently displayed right in the center of the flag. That particular aspect means that what we learn from them is that order does create success, and we find that success to be something we applaud. I mean, the amount of pollination of plants throughout the entire country is just phenomenal when you see how much the honeybee is part of that whole system. It's not just honey they produce. I mean, it seems to be from pollination, so many other things. So what can we learn from them? We can see that there is a kind of a submissive aspect to the need of the hive that allows the hive to produce more than it could as just an individual bee. For example, 99% of the hive is female. Actually, probably 99.5% of the hive is female. Only one of those females in the entire hive, the queen, will give birth to the progeny there. So it's a big family. She has the ability to do so. Now, I just had a recent hive of my own where her presence was, well, she was absent. There was some concern. A couple worker bees, these are also females, said, hey, we know how to fix this. We're going to start laying our own eggs. Now, a worker bee who decides to now substitute for the queen only lays what are called drones. Now, drones are male bees. That disharmony, that failure of the system, because someone stepped into the role of queen without having all of the necessary components there. There's actually a mating aspect that the queen goes through so that she has both the male and the female DNA necessary for that development, resulted in what's called a very, very poor queenless hive. The hive actually starts to have civil wars inside there because there's a battle between workers who now are trying to vie for the top spot. Eventually, the hive falls apart completely because drones do not work in the hive, and drones do nothing but consume what's already in the hive, the honey that's been collected for the end of the year. Anyway, what you've got is a very ordered system, but a very fragile system as well. That's what you can learn from it. It works well, but it can also collapse.
So I think so it's interesting that you say that, because right now, one of the biggest pushbacks that I see in American culture is the idea that a hierarchy is almost evil at its core. Why should one person be ahead of another? We're all equal. We should all be the locust instead of the bees. So is there a system that's better than the other, or is it that we need to pay attention or can learn different lessons throughout the insect world, and we can pay attention to and take what's best from the insect world itself?
Yeah, what the second part, you can take the best from both of them. And these are on the spectrum. Most of the people will say, well, you're talking good and bad. The honeybees are good. The desert locust is bad. No, not quite. There's a fragility in the honeybee effort, and there's also a chaotic kind of movement forward in the locust. So there's errors in both of those, or difficulties that we can look at and learn from, and we can also learn from them without having to experience them ourselves. That's one of the benefits, hopefully, from the book. I'm just trying to get a conversation started where people are using these as the examples before us, as opposed to how the people in Australia are doing this, or how the people in Germany or China, which has for some reason a quick rushing in some way to disparage those countries and their efforts, and the government leaders and the government and everything else like that. Let's just look at locusts, honeybees, and go from there.
So most people would, as you said, see the locusts as bad, and I understand there's a neutrality in the insect world. There's not a lot of insects that are thinking, I'm going to go take over the world today. So what would you say is an unseen positive that we can take from the locusts? Because I'm one of those people. Yeah, I kind of think locusts bad. Locusts go eat crops. Crops feed us. Locusts bad. So what can we learn from the locusts that we might normally not pay attention to?
Well, one of the things is there is a social networking taking place within the locust swarm. Their brains have increased in size by about 30%. The primary part that's increased is their vision and their ability to detect odors. So those two aspects of their brain have increased in size, making them much more aware of what's going on around them. Those increases have also given them the strength to continually do what's called search for the center. They're actually trying to find the best location, the best decision from which to go forward. Now, social media and the rest of it can be disparaged rather quickly as, and it's making us all into automatons that are looking for a thumbs up or an approval of some sort like that. But there's also some things to benefit from that. The ability sometimes to find the solution to a problem is best understood by the myriad of options that you can actually look at. Those things appear to be what's happening within the locust swarm. This search for the middle is actually a searching for a consensus of where to go next to be able to find the best location for the swarm to continue to grow, eat, consume, and move forward. They don't know it individually, but there is a general consensus that the entire group does, and that's what they're learning from that regard. And we can do the same thing. Once again, you had said we don't want to have a single leader. Well, sometimes there is a benefit from a lot of inputs. In my book, though, I say there's also a mob mentality within humans. We, for some reason, find that if you get a bunch of people together, if you get a large enough group, we seem to gravitate south. We start to go the wrong direction. So there's a point of which a large enough group starts to break down within human society. We're not locusts. We can't get to millions and billions and stuff like that and still be able to go that way. But maybe there's something else at a smaller level. Are you familiar with the Dunbar number?
No, I don't think I am.
Okay. The Dunbar number was put out as a point of which human society seems to start to need additional levels of bureaucracy. Most military units are 150 people or less. The number itself is 150. And less than 150, we seem to be able to interact with one another without the overarching suspicion that they are trying to make us do something. It seems like within our own human brain, that Dunbar number seems to be a critical point upon which distrust begins to work its way into an organization. Military units, some small churches. You've got Gore-Tex, for example, the company that makes much of the equipment for the use in the Army for repelling bullets, found itself limiting the sizes of buildings and certain operational units to 150 people or less, because they found when they kept it at that number, they could maximize the interaction of the people within the unit to be most effective in the decision that was going to be made. We could learn from that, because that would be saying that the locusts have found that theirs kind of continues upward. Ours is a Dunbar number. When we get to 150 to 300, companies become battalions, becomes brigades. You can't have that same effectiveness as you could just at a company level effort.
Yeah, I think that's spot on, because I can't tell you how many privates look at the.
Oh, I lost you. Yeah. Uh-oh. I think I lost you. So Ken's saying he loves listening. No, I'm not hearing you. No. Don't know what happened. Let's see. You can hear me though? Okay. Well. I heard a click. No, I can't hear you. Oh, for a moment there, I heard something.
You heard me for a second.
There you go. I hear you now.
That is so weird. I didn't really do anything. I just clicked something on. So Kenneth, KJ, that's KJ. So
okay.
He's supposed to be on. So I don't know how he's doing it, but Charlie, Chappie. I'm like, who's Charlie? Yeah, we know, KJ. Thanks. We're having technical difficulties. KJ's telling me the volume's off. Thanks. So I was about to. Oh yeah. When you're saying that the levels for the Dunbar number, hold on. I have a child in here asking something. What?
I'm connecting to your phone.
Oh, okay. So he turned the headphones on out there, and it was connecting to my phone. So
okay,
or to the laptop. So mystery solved. So yeah, I think that when a lot of soldiers at the lowest levels, they look at the brigade or division commander as these guys that just don't care about them. Even the battalion commander, a lot of them don't think that they care. It's okay, maybe the company commander. So that's within that Dunbar number. So one of the things you said right there was, I think that was really interesting. The awareness of location goes up when they're, because of the lack of resources, their brains actually get bigger. And so there's the awareness of location. What can we learn from that?
Awareness of location. Well, once again, their location is the critical part for survival. The locust is aware of the next airstream that's to their benefit for going downwind to finding rain, which is going to result in a increase in vegetation and an increase in diet for them. All of those things are their awareness that allows them to be able to grasp what's happening in and around them.
But how does that translate for us? Is it just situational awareness of where we are day to day? Is it that we need to be aware of our own resources, what's available? Because I'm guessing the whole book is about what we can learn from insects. Is that kind of the core of the book?
Yeah. Well, what we as communities can learn from those communities. So it's not as, of course, communities are going to get down to families and to individuals, but you're trying to stay at that level. To how does this community, though drastically different than us, work to be successful? One of the things about the desert locust and their success is that it took the UN, and it was one of the first successful UN efforts to be able to control these tremendous outbreaks that were happening all over northern Africa. It took someone who could cross national boundaries without starting a war in order to finally say, okay, these locusts are going there because that's where the airstreams, that's where the pressure differential is going to be bringing them, and we need to go that way and confront the next breeding ground. We needed that awareness, I guess, to their awareness of what's going on for us to take action.
So in that case, it's one community going in to destroy another community because we see it as a negative thing. So for the book, it's more, instead of on an individual level, what can I learn from a locust or from a honeybee? It's more, what can my community, what should my local community potentially, whether that's an extended family, whether it's a church, whether it's the part of the neighborhood I live, what can I learn from the community of the honeybee or the locust or other insects? Is that more along the lines?
Right. And also to take it from a philosophical standpoint. And bear with me here, is there's two ways from a worldview standpoint to try and think of what we have around us. One's mimetic and the other one's poietic, or mimesis and poiesis. These two different ways are, you can link them back to Plato and Aristotle, but a mimetic view regards the world as having a given order and a given meaning, and thus sees our human beings' effort as to discover that. That means we discover it and we conform to it. Poiesis, by way of contrast, sees the world as just so much raw material, out of which meaning and purpose can be created by the individual. As an engineer and having to deal with environmental engineering and sustainability efforts, most people are poietic in their outlook. This is just a bunch of raw materials. All we need to do is organize it in the right fashion. We'll be able to control the food supply, be able to control the temperature of the planet, be able to move forward because it's just a bunch of raw materials. That, I think, fails to see what we can learn from what's already successful around us. The mimetic point of view, the looking at what things actually are and then learning from them. Michael Phelps, for example, is an easy example of a person who's took biomimicry to such an extent. If you remember, he won, I don't know, 7 or 8 gold medals in was it the 2000 or 2004 Olympics?
Oh, was it that long ago? Oh my goodness. Yeah, I
Maybe
remember. He won a lot though.
Yeah. And do you remember his swimsuit? What was unique about it?
Well, originally he put on the Nike, the full body one, right? That had the moisture wicking and it cut down on the water, the friction in the water, correct?
Right. And it was mimicked after shark skin.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah. And that was something to be learned from what was already out there and allowed him to be able to move forward from mimicking what was already there and learning from it. We don't want to do that. We want to say, oh, no, we're just too smart. We're just too intelligent. It's not what already is here that we need to learn from, conform to, and be able to capitalize on. It's just a bunch of raw materials. And because of that, we're losing, I guess, this effort of understanding what we really want to have as sustainable. Going back to Frankel, his search was that there's a bigger meaning to this entire debate than people are putting on the table. We're just going to make it the program of the week, and everybody's going to go and recycle, and then we'll go and worry about a little bit of water efforts and clean up the streams, and then we'll go back and concern ourselves with the landfills, and then when it's all over with, we'll just have lunch. I think we're missing the fact that it's not just a bunch of raw materials out there. It's a story that we're a part of, and the bigger portion of the story is what we can learn from.
So that makes me think in terms of third world, second world, and first world, because you see an advancement in technology that as countries go through these different stages, once they hit first world and even begin to higher first level. So you look at like the United States. Originally, we're just burning through everything we need to burn through. We're cutting down wood, we're making farms, but we are using everything we can. Go through the Industrial Revolution, we get to the point where we're burning everything and we have smog in Los Angeles in the mid 80s that is just horrible. But then we got to the point where we started going, well, now we're advanced enough that we can start looking at some better ways of doing things and shifting from that resources only into that given order, the mimetic, right? But at the same time, that's one of the issues I have is when these activists, and I'm not trying to make this political, but just worldview type things, where I go, well, if you really want to look at something that's going on and you're worried about the pollution, why aren't you talking about China and India? Meanwhile, I understand that China and India are going through those industrial growth pains that we went through, 50 to 100 years ago. So is it natural for man to go from that poiesis to mimetic, or is that something that we have to consciously do to make sure that we are having a sustainable environment and a sustainable world and not just burning through everything?
I don't know if it's natural to change one to the other. I think it's more a lack of humility to move from one to the other, to think that our control over the resources that are at our disposal can be controlled and placed at our disposal in a much more easily handleable, easy and more manageable way. The first part, I think, is the way it's been for such a long time. We were to try and figure out what was the mimetic, that which we would mimic way that things were succeeding. There were certain streams, there were certain ways that the land that we had to occupy needed to be regenerated. We have seemed to have forgotten that, and that forgetting of those things is to our detriment. And it makes the entire solution now just something that in the middle of the night, some science fiction program can say, we just need to go to another planet. We just need to create a couple of, give it to the scientists. They'll figure it all out and we'll just have a nice day. But it won't be that way. It's got to be somewhere else. It goes back to Frankl and his search for meaning. It's a search for sustainability.
Yeah, I don't see us going through the Wall-E solution anytime soon.
Yeah.
Considering how much it costs to get things into space and transported, it's just even getting a pound of material into space costs tens of thousands of dollars, and we're just not at that point. So when we're focusing on what we can do here, let me ask you something, because with sustainability, one of the things I've always thought is not counterintuitive, but counterproductive, is the environmentalist movement. Now, let me clarify when I say that. I remember reading a book about environmentalism, and it was taking it to an extreme. It said there was this, he talked about how there was this grove of aspen trees up in, I believe there were, birch trees up in upstate New York. And it was this last little forest of birch trees. And the environmentalists were going and saying, look, we need to fence this grove of trees off because the deer are coming in and they're eating this grove of trees. And if we don't do something, then this grove of trees is going to be gone. We need to sustain this little grove of trees. But those grove of trees should never have existed. They existed because 200 years ago, New York was pushing west and they were cutting down all the trees for farms. And then as Ohio opened up in the further west, people moved further west to better farmland. And these open areas, which used to be hardwood, well, now you had these aspen, the grove of different birch trees and et cetera. So there was this common sense lost of, you're worried about keeping these trees that never should have been there to begin with, because you're discounting that man is part of the environment. And so, man, yeah, we do things that aren't always great, but we're part of it. We have, for recorded history, we've always been there because we are recording history. So I'm curious, when you're looking at these different insects, and I assume there's more than just locusts and honeybees. I would assume, or is that the focus?
Oh, that's the focus. Those are the two extremes.
Oh, just those two. Oh, okay.
Yeah, and the whole thing is one's hated, one's loved. Let's look at the spectrum of those two.
And then
I'm
finding.
I'm talking about balance and tension. I'm talking about communication, decision making, how they allocate work, how they manage stress, and then contrasting those with each other. So that's what pretty much I'm putting on the table.
Okay, so let's go through a couple of those. Like communication. I know honeybees have a very complex language of bum shaking. They move their tails around to say, this is where to go. This is where the good stuff is. How does that contrast to locusts? Because you said the locusts, they don't have a hierarchy. And so how do locusts communicate?
Well, that's the increase of the senses, the increase of their eyesight, their increase of their sense of smell. Both of those allow them within the grouping that's present to be able to search for the middle, search for the structure that's there and move forward from it. So that's a communication strength that allows them to move as a group, almost as an army, successfully. And even though there's no one within that particular group leading, they still appear to be led.
A commander of mine would have been, years ago. We were talking about when different things, and he said, look, we know better as a group than we do individually. So he said, let's all guess when Assad is going to fail in Syria. And he had us all guess. This was, I'm trying to remember if this was an intel unit, if this was, it had to have been a different unit. I don't think it was an intel unit. Oh, I'm sorry. It wasn't. It was my second unit. And we all guessed. And, you had a big range. And then when Assad fell last year, I reached out to him and we were only off by like a year. While we had this huge range of choices.
Right.
Once you compressed it together, our average thought process actually made it pretty close. Is that the type of thing that we're talking about? Is that we are we are smarter and we're intuitively better as a group than we are necessarily. The synergy of all of us is smarter than the smartest guy in the group.
Yeah, I mean, that's one of the things that you can bring it to the table from what locusts can do in searching for the middle. Take that though to the honeybees, because there's something there too. You mentioned about the dancing and stuff like that, but there's also another part of their dancing that takes place when they swarm to create two hives. You know, there is a division of a hive into two that happens every spring, especially when the queen and the hive as itself feels like the space isn't available for them to continue to grow. Well, once they leave the hive, and the queen will take approximately 60% of the older workers with her to a tree branch, and you'll see hanging from a tree branch this ball of bees. There is actually a decision-making process taking place. The honeybees, who used to be looking for food, now in about 24 to 72 hours, will now search for their new home. And they will do that same dance on the outside of that ball of bees during that period of time. And they will debate with one another. The more intense the dance is, the more intense that particular bee believes the place that she found is better than anybody else. That intensity actually drops off at a certain rate, so that the last bee dancing is usually the bee with the strongest argument as to where to go. Now, other bees will go, they'll follow what she says, they'll go check it out, they'll come back. And with that intensity increase, because they're doing a similar dance, eventually that bee ball, that swarm, that group of bees that are around that branch will take off to that new home. In that particular situation, what you can learn from the honeybees is this willingness to surrender their position by slowly just losing the intensity of their own argument. We as humans want to die on the sword. Our political process makes it so that you're not going to change my mind, and I'll tell you until I die. The only way this is going to get out is with my leaving as a dead person in a coffin. That is not what the bees are doing. They're actually leaking, is the way it's many times communicated, information and their intensity of the argument. Most people aren't aware of that, but that's something you can learn from looking at honeybees and their ability to make some pretty grandiose decisions in a very short period of time. Well,
so there's a point where you can have your opinion, but you need to know when it's time to let go of your opinion and listen to somebody else and see if maybe their opinion's better.
That's right.
That's kind of what I got out of it.
Yeah.
Okay. KJ actually has a question for you. He said, you define sustainability as a journey rather than a destination. How can individuals and institutions measure success along that journey?
How can individuals and institutions measure success along that journey? I guess is first to humbly understand that expectations and participation are a big part along this journey. For example, your journey to become sustainable, let's say it has to do with the water resources available, are going to change with time. The idea that anybody would buy bottled water 20 years ago was actually, laughable. Now we've got, I think in Europe, it's the highest, and maybe it's been that way for over a decade, but you're going to sell more water than you are any soft drinks. That was an expectation change along this journey that we need to be aware of. And as we continue the expectation, we also have to understand participation. We have to get people participating locally along this journey to make some type of difference in it. You mentioned about the aspect of the birch trees that were going to be cordoned off for their protection, and the environmentalists in that area were attempting to do just that. The participation of those in that area would be the best to be able to say, is this worthwhile or not? Is this small grove of birch trees for some reason a benefit to the larger ecosystem or our particular community that we live in? Along this journey, if we understand those two things, participation and expectations, that they change and they require both, then we can finally get there. Many times when these things kind of gravitate to the top, you'll have some political, I want to call it know-it-all, but some political hierarchy that says, this is what you got to do. Well, maybe not. Maybe the participation of the local people need to be included here.
Yeah, KJ and I are very much let the lowest level handle things, because generally the federal government doesn't really care about you very much. But it's interesting you say expectation of participation, because that's the core of my counseling, is having expectations and unrealistic expectations. And then especially in relationships, you have to come to win-win. So that's the participation, is you have to find those middle grounds of your expectations, so that you're both getting your expectations met. So it's really interesting you said it like that. So we have about 10 more minutes. So if anybody else has any more questions, please ask. I wanted to point out, though, that one of Liberty, I think I downplayed your background a little bit, since I didn't give you any of a background. He said he must know you, because Liberty said David holds a BS in engineering from the United States Military Academy, as well as 2 master's degrees. So I think kudos to you, because I have those. I don't have the engineering. My undergrad's in liberal arts, but I have 2 masters, one in divinity and family and marriage. So you actually have master's degrees that are worth something, and I have master's degrees that I got pieces of paper that say you can think, which I think is one of the funniest things in the world. So with these 2 different groups, are there any crossovers that you see between these 2 that say maybe this is something we should really understand, because we see this in both communities of locusts and honeybees?
Well, I didn't quite bring them to the table that they were similar as in communities, because they're not. The honeybee has a very structured environment to pollinate and create for that enclosed hive what they desire. The locust is forever gregarious in its outgrowth, and it's pushing forward. So there's not a similarity, but the contrast, I think, brings to the table. Let's talk about in communication. You mentioned about the dancing of the bee. There's a message being expressed. There's communication from odor from the queen that tells about the health of the hive. There's actually lights or the ability to see that gives the bee strength in its search for pollination efforts. For contrast, the locusts do things by example. There is a constant use of their eyes to see what others are doing. They don't communicate directly with each other to any great extent at all. Actually, they're rather frightening. I mean, one of the things you mentioned in Utah is that these particular insects seem to go forward because the one behind them is wanting to eat them if they stop. There's this constant moving forward because they better not stop or their life is in jeopardy. So there's an example that says let's go forward, but there's also a fear that I better keep going forward or this isn't going to turn out well. Now those are both ways about communicating.
That's interesting. I didn't realize that about. I guess maybe I've learned that at some point about locusts, but I'd forgotten that yeah, they'll also eat each other at some point because of the scarcity of resources.
Yeah, they're cannibalistic. That it kind of keeps them moving. There's an interesting. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
No, you go. Keep going, please.
There's an interesting experiment that I talk about in the book where they were trying to figure out at what mass of locusts does the movement in one direction take over. And it was a very large drum of which they put locusts in there, and the locusts were they're called instars. This is a developmental step where they slowly grow in size and eventually they gain wings so that they can fly. But at a step prior to their wing growth, they're on the ground walking, they're moving. And that movement in one direction, it's around a very large drum, becomes I think it was about 75 to 100 locusts in total, and of course the drum size is a concern here, would start to go in the same direction because of the fear of being devoured by the rest of the locusts if you're not going in the same direction. It was an interesting thing saying the cannibalistic tendency, unfortunately, is a big driver telling them this is the way you ought to go, and you better do so, or we're going to eat you. So, I mean, if you want to go to the social networking, yes, it does give us a number of strengths, but if you're going against the social network opinion, you're going to get devoured.
KJ's got one more. In your view, what's the biggest myth about sustainability that's keeping society stuck in a locust-like mindset?
That's keeping society stuck in a locust-like mindset. Well, I guess you're assuming that we're in the locust-like mindset of devouring and devouring and devouring. The biggest myth. Maybe it's a fear that we can't pull back from that. I can imagine there is a fear that our consumption lifestyle is the problem, and that might be it. There might be some things to be gained from it.
I mean, I would push back on KJ because I don't think that we're in necessarily a locust-like mindset. I think we're more along the lines of, depending on which country and what community, it's different. So, David, I'm going to show here your books, and it's funny that I think KJ might have just done the same thing. So, is that the best place to get your book? davidaugerbooks.com?
That is.
Awesome. I saw it's also on Kindle right now, Kindle Unlimited, but I think you'd probably prefer people to go onto your website and get it from there because, hey, you're an artist. You've created that.
Yeah, and if they want to, there's an audiobook too, if you'd like to.
Is there?
Yeah.
I'm definitely going to go check. If it's on Libby app, I will definitely listen to it. Is there anything you'd like to have? We have just about 4 minutes is all. And is there anything you'd like to, I'll give you kind of a free form here for the last few minutes.
Well, I'm writing another book that has to deal with the town of Breckenridge, Colorado. My grandparents were gold miners in that small town. We're talking the turn of the century, 1890, 1910. And during that time, the town, which I found is the most unsustainable place you could possibly live. I mean, people are there to dig gold out of the ground and get back out of the mountains as quickly as they can. That there might be something to be gained there too, in the fact that the town did sustain itself, and right now it's a pretty popular skiing resort.
Being from Salt Lake, I know right where Breckenridge is. But I'm a hometown guy, and I'd be skiing. I'd stay skiing in Salt Lake up the canyons. That's really interesting too, though, because I especially when you consider Breckenridge being a success story, and throughout the West, you find these towns that were boom and became bust throughout the West.
Yeah.
Well, David, I really appreciate your time. We shift over at the hour mark over to YouTube. You're more than welcome to stay on, and we can keep talking about this or whatever. Or if you need to go, that's fine. I don't want to have a situation where you're like, well, I mean, I've talked to you and you don't know what, you didn't even know who I was coming in. But this has been really, really interesting. Now I need to go find it. Now, actually, I think I'm at the point I'm looking for a new book. So this might be the book to go download tonight so I can start tomorrow morning.
Great. Well, thanks a lot then.
Thank you for coming on. I appreciate it, David. You have a great night.
You too.
Right.
Goodbye.
Well, that was David Auger. And again, if you want to go read his book, please do so. I don't think I want to be staying on for another hour and doing one by myself. So I'm going to say goodnight to everybody. Safe travels to KJ. Thanks for popping in. Liberty, thank you. And KJ for being able to ask a couple questions. United Wi-Fi, give you a shout out. Woohoo! It worked. KJ was able to watch the show and ask some questions. So with that, next week we will be on same bat time, same bat channel, and I expect KJ will be back on the boring part of the United States, and he can tell us all about his vacation with his family if he wants. Maybe we can get him to show us some pictures too. But thank you again for everybody who participated. We will see you next week. And with that, you have a good night, and we will see you later.
Gee, Ray, what do you want to do tonight?
The same thing we do every night, Pinky. Try to take over the world.
All right, yo, let's get into it.
Try to take over the world.
Speech and freedom
Try
of
to
conscience.
take over the world.
And greatest chaplain in the world, Mr.
Try
Lanson
to
Neal.
take over the world.